The mist hung low over Canyon de Chelly that November morning in 1872. It moved through the red rock walls like something alive, like something that knew what was coming and wanted to hide from it. The sound of gunfire echoed between the ancient stones, bouncing back and forth until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Black smoke rose from burning homes made of earth and prayer, and women ran with children in their arms, while cavalry soldiers thundered through the village on horses whose hooves sounded like the drums of judgment. A young soldier stood in the doorway of a small adobe home. He was 29 years old, though the scar running fresh from his temple to his jaw made him look older. His name was Caleb Morrison, and he had been following orders his entire adult life. The orders today were simple: clear the village, pacify the resistance. Those were the words his commanding officer used. Pacify. As if what they were doing could be made clean by choosing the right vocabulary. Inside the home, pressed against the far wall, a woman held her daughter close. The mother was perhaps 45, her face lined with years of sun and wind and survival. The daughter was younger, maybe 24, with high cheekbones and eyes so dark they seemed to hold the night sky within them. On her left cheek was a small scar shaped like a crescent moon. Both of them were waiting to die. Caleb raised his rifle. His finger found the trigger with the certainty of training the muscle memory of 1,000 drills. This was what soldiers did. They followed orders. They completed missions. They did not ask whether the mission was right, because asking that question led to hesitation, and hesitation got you killed. But something happened in that doorway. Something that would change everything that came after. His eyes met the young woman's eyes, and in that moment of connection, something inside Caleb Morrison cracked open. He saw her, not as an enemy, not as a target, not as a problem to be solved. He saw her as a human being, terrified and cornered and waiting for death at the hands of a man in uniform who was supposed to represent justice. The rifle lowered. His hands moved without his permission, or perhaps they finally moved with his permission for the first time in years. "Run," he said. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Run, and don't look back." The mother grabbed her daughter's hand. They moved toward the back of the home, toward a small opening that led into the rocks, into the maze of canyons where the cavalry would not follow. But before they disappeared, the young woman turned. She looked at Caleb Morrison. She memorized his face, the scar, the shape of his jaw, the way his shoulders slumped with a weight that had nothing to do with his equipment. She filed these details away in a place where important things were kept, things that mattered, things that might matter again someday. Then she was gone, and Caleb Morrison stood alone in the empty doorway, wondering if he had just committed treason or finally done something right. 3 years later, August 1875. The land stretched endless under a sky the color of old brass. Heat shimmered across the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of New Mexico territory, turning distance into liquid illusion. The desert remembered violence the way stone remembers rain, holding it in layers, marking it in ways that only time could read. Caleb Morrison rode alone. 33 years had carved themselves into sun-darkened skin. Broad shoulders carried more than physical weight, now bowed slightly under the accumulated burden of memory and regret. His horse moved steady beneath him, hooves marking rhythm against earth that had witnessed too many endings. The scar from temple to jaw caught the afternoon light. It had faded from red to white over the years, but it remained visible, a permanent reminder of choices made in uniform, of orders followed, of sleep that no longer came easy. He was 2 days out from Las Vegas settlement, the small town he now called something close to home. His saddlebags held supplies for the month: flour, coffee, ammunition, the ordinary needs of a man trying to forget extraordinary sins. Then he saw the smoke. Black against pale sky, it rose like a question he did not want to answer. His chest tightened with that familiar weight, the kind that came with memories of burning villages and screams that echoed across years. His hand moved to the rifle without thought, fingers finding wood and metal with the certainty of old training. The horse sensed his tension ears flicking back. Caleb urged it forward. Each step brought the smoke closer. Each step brought the smell: gunpowder, charred wood, Something worse underneath that he recognized but refused to name. The wreckage emerged from heat shimmer like a ghost materializing. A wagon, or what remained of one. Canvas torn and blackened. Wood splintered. Supplies scattered across hard ground as if some giant hand had shaken a child's toy and found it disappointing. 3 bodies. Men judging by size and clothing. Merchants maybe, or traders, who had wagered their lives against the odds of safe passage and lost. Caleb dismounted, slow boots hitting earth with careful weight. The crows had already arrived, their cries sharp and ancient, their patience infinite. He checked each body with professional efficiency, the soldier in him never fully retired. Dead hours, not days. Shot at close range. Robbery clearly, but something felt wrong. The scene had been arranged, staged, to tell a particular story. Caleb crouched, studying boot prints in the dust. His voice came dry, barely above a whisper, talking to no one and everyone. They weren't even smart enough to wear the right shoes. The tracks told truth. Heavy work boots, not moccasins. White men pretending to be Apache raiders, counting on fear and prejudice to cover their crime. It was an old trick, one that worked more often than it should. He stood scanning the wreckage more carefully now, looking for what did not belong. The wind moved through broken canvas, creating sounds like whispered warnings. Something caught his eye near the rear wheel. Movement, slight, almost nothing. Then he heard it. A breath shallow and controlled, the breathing of someone trying very hard not to be found. Caleb moved around the wagon's bulk, hand steady on the rifle, though he somehow knew he would not need it. The wheel cast shadow in the slanting sun, and there, tied to the spokes with rope that had bitten deep into skin, sat a woman. She was Apache. He knew it instantly. The high cheekbones, the dark eyes that seemed to hold entire histories. Her hair, black as crow wings, hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, matted with dust and dried blood. The dress she wore had been torn, whether by violence or time he could not tell, but her posture remained unbent. Rope bound her wrists to the wheel, and where it wrapped her skin had split. Blood dried in dark lines. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Not pleading, not afraid, just watching, measuring, deciding whether he was another kind of death or something else entirely. She did not lift her head until he was close enough to cast shadow across her face. When she did, those eyes caught the dying light, dark and fierce and absolutely unbroken. She had seen cruelty. She had catalogued it, understood its varieties, learned to recognize the difference between a man and a monster. Caleb froze. Words would not come. His throat felt tight. His mind suddenly crowded with images from 3 years past. A canyon filled with mist. A doorway. A mother and daughter waiting to die, and him lowering his rifle, letting them run. Then he saw it. The small scar on her left cheek, shaped like a crescent moon. His heart stopped beating for a full second before remembering how. The woman spoke. Her voice was hoarse but clear, each word carefully shaped in English that surprised him. "Do not touch me unless you mean to finish it." The words carried no fear, only dignity, only the acknowledgement that death might come and she would meet it with her eyes open. Caleb had heard many things in his 33 years, prayers, curses, begging that broke something in the listener, but never words like these. He found his voice rough from disuse and emotion. "I mean to set you free, ma'am, if you'll allow it." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of reassessment. She gave one small nod. Permission granted, though her body remained tense, ready for betrayal. Caleb knelt in the dust beside her. The knife came from his belt blade, catching light as he positioned it carefully against the rope. He could feel her watching every movement, could sense her readiness to fight or flee if his hands moved wrong. The rope parted with a sound like a snake shedding skin. She did not run, did not even pull away immediately. Instead, she rubbed her wrists, slow eyes never leaving his face, studying him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. Blood seeped from the rope burns, but she did not flinch, did not make a sound. Caleb offered his canteen. She hesitated, pride warring with need. Need won. She took it, tilted it to her lips, and drank. Water glistened on her mouth, and for one strange moment, watching her drink, Caleb felt something he had not felt in years. Not desire exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of another survivor in a world designed to break people. He stood and stepped back, giving her space to find her feet. "Can you ride?" She nodded once, rising with visible effort, legs trembling from hours in one position but refusing to show weakness. Caleb brought his horse closer. The animal stood calm despite the smell of blood and death. He helped her mount, his hands careful and respectful, no presumption of ownership or control. She settled into the saddle with her back straight despite exhaustion. They rode in silence, leaving the wreckage and its dead behind. The sun leaned toward the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Neither spoke. The wind did their talking, carrying whispers through sage and juniper. The ranch came into view as dusk approached. Nothing grand. A small house built with his own hands. A corral. A barn that leaned slightly but held strong. The kind of place a man builds when he is trying to prove to himself that he can create instead of destroy. He helped her down from the horse, led her inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and loneliness, two scents that had become familiar. He prepared the small guest room, laid out clean blankets, brought water in a basin, set out cloths for washing. "There's food in the kitchen when you're ready," he said, his voice low. "Door's not locked. You're free to go whenever you choose." He left her there, went to tend the horse, giving her privacy, giving her time. Outside in the cooling air, alone with the animal's steady breathing, he spoke to himself, a habit born of too many solitary years. "Well, Caleb, you've really done it now. Found a woman who probably wants to kill you." The words carried dark humor, the kind a man uses to keep himself from thinking too hard about the strangeness of his situation. He unsaddled the horse, brushed it down, checked its hooves with automatic care. When he returned to the house, he found her in the main room. She had cleaned herself as best she could, had wrapped her wrists in cloth torn from the dress he had provided. She was standing before the small collection of photographs he kept on the wall. She was staring at one photograph in particular. His family, Eleanor and little Lily, both dead 3 years now. Fever taking them while he was away playing soldier. The woman did not turn when he entered, but she spoke. Her English accented but clear. "They are gone." The simple statement hit harder than accusation would have. "Yes, ma'am. Long time ago." She nodded slowly, still studying the photograph. Then she turned, and he saw her face fully in the lamplight. Younger features beneath the hardship. 27, now 3 years older than when he had first seen her in that canyon doorway. The small scar on her left cheek shaped like a crescent moon. Eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. "You have a name?" Caleb asked, needing to fill the silence with something ordinary. She tilted her head slightly, considering whether to answer. Then she looked toward the window where stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Winona," she said finally. "In your tongue it means firstborn daughter." "That's a beautiful name." He meant it. "I know your name." The room seemed to shrink. The air felt suddenly thin. "You say it in your sleep. 3 winters ago. I remember your face." Caleb's throat closed. He had wondered in the years since if any of them had survived, if his small act of disobedience had mattered. Now he knew. "Why you help me today?" Winona asked, her head tilting with genuine curiosity. He struggled for words that would sound true. "Because it was the right thing to do." She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "Or because you try to fix old wrong." The accuracy of it staggered him. This woman who should hate him, who had every right to see him as just another soldier in a long line of soldiers, somehow understood what drove him better than he understood himself. "I can't undo the past," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "But you can choose different path now." Something in her voice, some quality of certainty, made him want to believe her. They stood there in the lamplight, stranger and stranger, connected by violence and survival, and something neither could name. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Caleb opened it to find Reverend Samuel Whitmore, red-faced and slightly out of breath, holding a pie covered with a cloth. The Reverend was a fixture in Las Vegas settlement, a former whiskey merchant turned man of God prone to enthusiasm and occasional lapses in judgment. "Caleb Morrison," Whitmore said, then stopped. His eyes found Winona standing in the room behind. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Is that an Apache woman in your house?" Caleb's exhaustion made him reckless. "No, Reverend, she's a hallucination from too much whiskey. Yes, she's Apache." Whitmore sputtered. "But this is highly irregular." Winona stepped forward, her voice gentle, her English perfect. "Your pie smells good, holy man." The Reverend's eyes went wide. He had not expected her to speak English, certainly not to compliment his offering. He held out the pie with trembling hands, suddenly uncertain. "It's from Ruth Patterson. She bakes for the congregation." "Then please thank her for her kindness," Winona said, taking the pie with grace that seemed to unsettle Whitmore more than anger would have. The Reverend backed toward the door, mumbling something about praying for them both, then fled into the darkness. Caleb closed the door and turned to find Winona examining the pie with a critical eye. "This one has too much sugar," she pronounced, "but kind heart behind it." Despite everything, despite the strangeness and the danger and the impossibility of the situation, Caleb laughed, a real laugh, the first in memory. Winona's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. She moved to the kitchen, began preparing food using his supplies, but with methods entirely her own. He watched fascinated as she combined ingredients in ways that seemed random but produced smells that made his stomach remember what hunger felt like. "You have yerba buena growing wild behind house," she said without looking at him. "Good. I make medicine for your shoulder." "My shoulder's fine." She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. "You favor left side when you walk. Old wound." "Yes, from the war." He was too surprised to deny it. She saw everything, noticed everything, the observation skills of someone who had survived by paying attention. They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now. The kind that exists between people who have shared something significant, even if they cannot name what it is. The food tasted better than anything he had made for himself in years. After dinner, Winona stood at the window looking out at stars that blazed cold and distant over the desert. Caleb cleaned the dishes, giving her space, not knowing what to say or do next. "My name," she said suddenly. "Winona. It means firstborn daughter in your tongue." "You said that," he reminded her gently. "But I not explain. In my language it means more. It means something that does not die even when cut down, something that blooms again no matter how hard the winter." Caleb stopped his work, turned to look at her silhouette against the window. "That's a good name for you, strong." "My mother choose it. She was healer. She know plants, know medicine, know how to read signs." Winona's voice softened. "She teach me these things before she die. I'm sorry for what happened that day, for all of it." She turned from the window, and in the lamplight, her face showed something complex and layered. Not simple forgiveness, but something deeper. "You are sorry, man," she said carefully. "But not bad, man. I see difference." The distinction struck him as important, though he was not sure he deserved it. She moved toward the small room he had prepared, paused in the doorway. "Tomorrow men will come looking for me. The ones who tie me to wheel. They will not stop." "Then they'll have to go through me first." Caleb heard himself say the words, the old soldier surfacing despite his wish to bury that part of himself. Winona studied him for a long moment. "Why you fight for stranger?" He had no good answer, no logical reason, just the feeling deep in his chest that this was somehow the right thing, the necessary thing, maybe the first truly necessary thing he had done since that day in the canyon when he had lowered his rifle. "You're not a stranger anymore," he said simply. She nodded once as if this made perfect sense, as if she had been expecting exactly this answer. Then she spoke words that would change everything. "When this is over, you will be my husband." Caleb's brain stopped working. He almost laughed, caught himself, tried to form words. "Ma'am, I think you're getting ahead of yourself." But Winona's face held no humor, no uncertainty. She looked at him the way someone might look at a fact of nature, undeniable and absolute. "Spirit, show me," she said quietly. "You save my body. I save your soul. This is our path." Before he could respond, before he could find words to question or refuse or laugh off the impossible statement, she went into the room and closed the door gently behind her. Caleb stood in his empty house, surrounded by silence and lamplight, holding on to the edge of the table to keep himself steady. Outside, night wind moved through the high desert, carrying sounds that might have been coyotes, or might have been ghosts, or might have been the future calling his name. He had saved her life today, and somehow, in ways he could not understand, his own life had become unsaved, uncertain. Cracked open to possibilities he had thought were buried with Eleanor and Lily in the small cemetery outside Las Vegas settlement. Sleep would not come easy tonight. It never did. But for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Morrison found himself hoping that tomorrow might bring something other than the weight of yesterday's failures. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that turns breath to visible mist and makes a man grateful for coffee. Caleb woke from restless sleep, fragments of dreams still clinging like cobwebs. Dreams of canyons and gunfire. Dreams of dark eyes that saw through him. He rose, dressed, moved to the kitchen with the automatic movements of routine. Fire needed building, water needed heating, coffee needed making, simple tasks that anchored a man to the world. The house was quiet, too quiet. Panic touched his chest, irrational but immediate. He moved quickly to the guest room, knocked soft against the door. No answer. He opened it to find the bed neatly made, blankets folded with precision, but the room empty. She had left. Of course she had left. Why would she stay? He was a stranger who happened to cut her free. Nothing more. The declaration about marriage had been shock confusion, maybe some Apache custom he did not understand. She was gone, back to whatever remained of her people, and he would return to his life of solitary penance. The thought brought an unexpected hollowness. Caleb stepped outside, scanning the pre-dawn landscape. The eastern sky showed the first hints of rose and gold. His horse stood in the corral undisturbed, no tracks leading away from the house that he could see. Then he heard it. A voice, soft, rhythmic, singing. He followed the sound around the back of the house up the small rise that gave view of the valley below. There, silhouetted against the brightening sky, stood Winona. Her arms were raised, her body moving in slow, deliberate motions. Not dance exactly, but something ceremonial. Prayer made physical. Caleb stopped, unwilling to interrupt. The language was Apache, the words unfamiliar, but the meaning felt clear. Gratitude for the sun, acknowledgement of the day, connection to something larger than individual survival. She moved with the grace of someone whose body had been trained to express what words could not. Each gesture seemed intentional, weighted with significance. Her hair, unbound, moved in the morning breeze like black water. He stood watching, feeling like an intruder on something sacred, yet unable to look away. There was beauty in it, not the kind that wanted to be seen, but the kind that existed whether witnessed or not. The ceremony ended. Winona lowered her arms, stood still for a moment facing the rising sun, then turned. Her eyes found him immediately, unsurprised. She had known he was there. "You wake early," she observed, walking down the slope toward him. "Habit from the war. You sleep all right? Apache do not sleep like white men. We rest, but we listen, always listen." She paused beside him. "Your house makes sounds in the night, settling, like old bones finding comfort." The description was oddly poetic. They walked back together, boots and bare feet making different sounds against the earth. "I can find you shoes," Caleb offered. "Feet should touch ground. This is how we hear what earth is saying." He did not argue. Who was he to tell her how to walk in a world that had tried to erase her? Inside he poured coffee, offered her a cup. She accepted, sniffed it with evident suspicion, then sipped carefully. Her face remained neutral, but he saw her eyes widen slightly. "Strong," she pronounced. "That's the point. Apache make different drink from roots, gentler." "I could learn," he said, surprising himself. She looked at him over the rim of the cup, something shifting in her expression. "Yes, you could." They ate breakfast in companionable silence. Eggs from his small coop, bread he had baked days ago, now slightly stale but edible. She watched him move around the kitchen with that same intense observation. Cataloging, learning, deciding something. "You live alone long time," she said. Not a question. 3 years, since my wife and daughter died. How they die. The directness should have stung, but somehow it did not. She was not prying. She was establishing facts, building understanding. Fever. I was away with the regiment. By the time I got word, they were already buried. He paused. I never got to say goodbye. Winona nodded slowly. This is hard, to carry words never spoken. Yes. My mother died in the attack. My father, my brother Dakota, all gone in one day. She stated it simply, without self-pity. I speak to them still, in prayers, they hear. You believe that believing and knowing are different. I know they hear because I feel them listening. Caleb wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but something in her certainty stopped him. Who was he to say what was real? He had seen enough death to know that grief made its own reality, carved its own spaces in the world. A sound interrupted them. Hooves, multiple horses, coming fast. Caleb's body responded before his mind caught up. He grabbed his rifle, moved to the window. Winona followed. No hesitation, no fear, just readiness. 3 riders approached, hard men on harder horses. They rode with the confidence of people who believed the world owed them cooperation. The lead rider was tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from meanness and left in the sun too long. His name was Colt Reeves, one of Silas Garrett's lieutenants. Caleb knew him by reputation, a man who would do anything for money and several things for free if they involved cruelty. They reined up in front of the house, did not dismount. Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. Winona stood in the doorway behind him, visible but not vulnerable. "Help you, gentlemen." Caleb's voice carried the kind of politeness that was really a warning. Colt Reeves spat tobacco juice, grinned without warmth. "We're looking for stolen property. Apache woman. Tracks led here. Only thing stolen here was her freedom. She's free now." Colt Reeves's grin widened, showing brown teeth. "Now that's where you're wrong, friend. Mr. Garrett paid good money for her. $300. Law says she's his. Law says slavery's over. Lincoln saw to that. She ain't American. She's Apache. Different rules." The logic was twisted but familiar. Caleb had heard variations of it his entire life. The casual dehumanization that made atrocity possible. "She's a human being," Caleb said quietly. "That's the only rule that matters." Colt Reeves's hand moved toward his gun. "You really want to die for some—" He used a word that hung in the air like poison. Caleb felt his finger tighten on the rifle trigger, felt the old familiar coldness spreading through his chest, the soldier returning, the killer he tried to bury. Then Winona spoke from behind him, her voice cutting through tension like a blade through silk. "You should leave now, before you regret staying." All 3 men laughed. The sound was ugly, dismissive. Colt Reeves nudged his horse forward slightly. "Little girl got spirit. Garrett will break that soon enough." "I said leave." Winona's voice had not risen, but something in it changed, a quality of absolute certainty. Colt Reeves opened his mouth to reply, then stopped. His horse was dancing sideways, nervous for no apparent reason. Then the saddle shifted. The cinch had been cut. Not completely, but enough. Colt Reeves grabbed for the horn as the saddle slipped, dumping him into the dust with a satisfying thud. The other two riders reached for their saddles, found the same problem. Their cinches had been compromised, not cut through, just weakened to the point of failure. Caleb stared. When had she done that? He had been watching the whole time. Winona stepped past him, moved down off the porch with liquid grace. She walked right up to Colt Reeves, who was struggling to his feet, rage coloring his face purple. "You cut our saddles, you savage!" She held up one finger, silencing him. In her other hand she held a small knife, the blade still showing threads from leather cinches. "I cut nothing that was not already broken," she said, her English perfectly clear, perfectly calm. "Like you, already broken inside, already rotten. The outside just does not show yet." Colt Reeves's hand went to his gun. Caleb's rifle came up fast, the metallic click of the hammer being pulled back loud in the morning air. "Next one goes through your leg," Caleb said quietly. "Your choice." The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. 4. Colt Reeves was weighing odds, calculating whether pride was worth pain. Caleb could see the math happening behind those mean little eyes. Colt Reeves spat again, this time missing Winona's feet by inches. "Garrett will come himself, with 10 men. You can't stop him." "Maybe not," Caleb agreed. "But I can make him regret trying." The 3 men gathered their damaged saddles, mounted their skittish horses with difficulty, and rode off. Their curses carried on the wind, fading as distance swallowed them. Caleb lowered the rifle, turned to Winona. "You cut their saddles." She examined her small knife as if noticing it for the first time. Spirits say enemy on foot is less dangerous than enemy on horse. Despite everything, despite the danger and the tension and the probability of violence to come, Caleb laughed. A real laugh that came from deep in his chest and felt like medicine. "Miss Winona, I think you're a lot more dangerous than you look." Her lips curved slightly. "This is why I am still alive, Caleb Morrison. Because men like him think woman means weak. They are wrong." They stood in the dusty yard, morning sun warming the air around them, and something shifted between them. Partnership, understanding, the recognition that they were now in this together, whatever this turned out to be. "They'll be back," Caleb said, stating the obvious. "Yes, with more men, more guns." Winona tilted her head, studying him. "You have friends in town, people who help." "Maybe. There's a marshal. Benjamin Ward. Good man. We served together in Texas back in '71. He's fair as the law allows in a place like this. Then we go to town. We ask for help before they come back." The suggestion surprised him. "Town folks aren't exactly welcoming to Apache." "I not ask for welcome. I ask for justice. Different thing?" She was right, of course. Justice and welcome had nothing to do with each other, but the courage it took for her to suggest walking into a town that likely saw her as an enemy. That took his breath slightly. "All right," he agreed. "We'll go. But you stay close to me. Some folks in Las Vegas settlement, they've got long memories and short tempers." "All people have this," Winona said simply. "Is not special to white men." They prepared quickly. Caleb saddled his horse, helped Winona up behind him. She settled against his back, her arms around his waist for balance. The contact was practical, necessary, but it made something in his chest feel strange and light. As they rode away, the sun climbing behind them, Caleb thought about the photograph on his wall. Eleanor and Lily. The family he had lost. The life he had thought was over. And he thought about the letter in his pocket, the one Eleanor had written before she died, the one he had never had the courage to open. He had carried it for 3 years like a wound he was afraid to look at. Maybe it was time. Maybe this strange woman with her Apache prayers and her knife skills and her absolute certainty about things he could not understand was right. Maybe he could choose a different path now. The road to Las Vegas stretched ahead of them, dust rising from the horses' hooves, mountains standing ancient and patient in the distance, and somewhere behind them on a ridge overlooking the valley, a figure stood motionless. watching them go. A man with a scar across his bare chest, a scar that should have killed him, watching with the patience of a hunter who had learned to wait. The ride would take 90 minutes. The danger would take much longer. The road to Las Vegas settlement wound through terrain that alternated between high desert scrub and rocky outcroppings. They passed other ranches along the way, saw distant figures working cattle or mending fence. Some waved, some stared. Word would spread fast. Caleb Morrison riding into town with an Apache woman clinging to his back like a second shadow. Let them talk. Winona remained silent for most of the journey, but her silence had a different quality than yesterday. Less guarded, more comfortable. Perhaps she was learning to trust. Or perhaps she was simply saving her energy for what lay ahead. When they crested the final rise, Las Vegas settlement spread before them, not large by Eastern standards, but substantial for New Mexico territory, maybe 3,000 souls. Adobe buildings mixed with newer wooden construction. The railroad had reached here 2 years ago, bringing commerce and complication in equal measure. They rode down the main street at mid-morning. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. A woman crossing the street grabbed her child's hand and hurried faster. A man outside the general store deliberately spat in their direction. But some faces showed different reactions. Curiosity instead of hate. Uncertainty instead of immediate judgment. Caleb focused on those faces, tried to believe they might matter. The marshal's office sat between the courthouse and the saloon, a strategic location that spoke to practical wisdom. Caleb dismounted, helped Winona down. She stood straight, meeting the stairs with her own gaze, unflinching. The door opened before Caleb could knock. Benjamin Ward filled the doorway, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his dark skin marked by old scars, his eyes alert and intelligent. He had been a Buffalo soldier, one of the black cavalrymen who fought Comanche and Kiowa and Apache across Texas and New Mexico. He had seen the ugly side of the Indian Wars, same as Caleb. But unlike many, Ward had come out of it still believing in something approximating justice. "Caleb Morrison," Ward said, his voice deep and measured. "Heard you had company." "Ben, this is Winona. She needs protection." Ward's eyes moved to Winona, assessment happening fast. Then he did something that surprised even Caleb. He nodded respectfully. "Ma'am." Winona studied him with the same intensity she brought to everything. Then slowly she nodded back. "You are different from other lawmen I see." Ward's mouth quirked slightly. "I know what it's like to be judged by skin color, ma'am. Won't do that to you." Something eased in Winona's posture. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of belief that this man might be different. "Come inside," Ward said, stepping back. "Tell me everything." They settled into the small office, Caleb and Winona on one side of the desk, Ward on the other. Slowly, carefully, they explained. The wagon attack, the bodies, Colt Reeves and his men, the threat from Silas Garrett. Ward listened without interrupting, taking notes in neat handwriting that seemed at odds with his rough hands. When they finished, he set down his pen and leaned back. "Silas Garrett," he said slowly. "That's a problem. You know him, know of him, been operating out of Santa Fe for years. Human trafficking mostly. Apache, Mexican, Chinese, sells them to mines, to brothels, to anyone paying. Got protection from some corrupt officials. Getting evidence on him is like trying to grab smoke." Ward opened a drawer, pulled out a thin file. "But there's something you might not know. Garrett wasn't always like this." Caleb raised an eyebrow. Ward continued. 15 years ago he was a farmer in Arizona Territory, had a wife, 2 young children. One night raiders attacked. Nobody knows for certain which tribe. Whole family killed. Garrett was the only survivor, left for dead with an arrow in his lung. Silence hung heavy in the room. "That doesn't justify what he does," Ward said quietly, "but it explains. Pain can turn a man into a monster if he lets it." Winona spoke, her voice low. "I understand loss. My family was killed too. by soldiers, but I did not become a slaver." "No, ma'am, you didn't. That's the difference between someone who chooses to heal and someone who chooses to spread the pain." The words settled over them like truth often does, heavy but necessary. Ward stood, moved to the window. "There's another problem, Douglas MacLeod." "What about him?" "Lost his son James 2 years back in a raid. Since then he's been filled with hate for anyone with native blood. Last night Garrett arrived in town. They were talking at the saloon. MacLeod's allied with him publicly now." Caleb remembered Douglas MacLeod, a big Scottish man with a carved face and unending grief, but something in the story never quite fit. "James MacLeod," Caleb said slowly. "I heard he died in a raid, defending something." Ward nodded slowly. "That's the official version, but there are people who say different." "Different how? James was 20 years old, full of the hate his father fed him. He didn't die defending anything, he died raiding, stealing horses from an Apache camp. Not self-defense, just theft, because he'd been taught your people didn't matter." Ward looked at Winona as he said this. Winona spoke softly. "My brother Dakota was 14 when he was shot in the back while running from cavalry." Silence stretched between them. "Enough grief to go around," she continued. "We can keep adding to it, or we can try something different." The wisdom in her words hung in the air. Ward returned to his desk. "I need to make inquiries. Careful ones. If Garrett's involved, this is bigger than a local matter. Might need to bring in federal marshals, but that takes time. And from what you've said, Garrett won't wait." "He paid $300, Winona said. "He thinks he owns me." "Men like that do not accept loss." Ward nodded grimly. "Which means he'll come for you, warrant or not, law or not." He looked at Caleb. "You prepared for that?" "Yes." One word. Simple. Absolute. Ward studied him, perhaps seeing the old soldier surfacing. "I can't officially support vigilante action," Ward said carefully. "But off-duty. Well, a man's entitled to his friends." It was as close to a promise of help as the law would allow. Caleb understood. He would take it. They stood to leave. At the door, Ward stopped them. "Miss Winona, you're braver than most. Walking into this town, I respect that." She met his eyes. Bravery and no choice look the same sometimes. Ward's laugh was short but genuine. Truth there. Outside the town had gathered an audience. People lined the boardwalk, watching. Some with hostility, some with simple curiosity. And there near the church stood an older man Caleb recognized. Edgar Holloway. 68 if he was a day. Weathered as old leather. Walking with a cane that supported a left leg that had never healed right from some long-ago injury. Edgar had been one of the first settlers in the area, back in the 40s when this land still belonged to Mexico on paper and belonged to violence in practice. His wife had been Navajo. She died years ago, but Edgar spoke her language still, honored her memory by refusing to join in the casual hatred that infected so many. The old man raised his cane in greeting. Caleb nodded back. Then another figure emerged from the church, Reverend Samuel Whitmore, still flustered from last night, his round face pink with effort or emotion, or both. "Caleb Morrison," Whitmore called out, moving toward them with surprising speed for a man of his build. "A word, if I may." They waited. Whitmore arrived slightly out of breath. "I've been thinking," he announced, "about last night, about pie and prejudice and the nature of Christian charity." "That's a lot of thinking, Reverend," Caleb said dryly. "Indeed, and I've concluded that I was hasty, presumptuous, perhaps even, dare I say it, unchristian in my initial reaction." He turned to Winona. "Miss, I apologize. You are a child of God same as any, deserving of respect." Winona tilted her head, perhaps surprised by the apology. "Your pie was good, too much sugar, but good heart." Whitmore blinked, then laughed, a genuine belly laugh that shook his frame. "Too much sugar. Ruth will appreciate that critique." He sobered slightly. "You're welcome in my church, miss. Both of you." should you ever feel so inclined. It was a small thing, one minister's change of heart. But small things had weight. Caleb felt it, saw it in the way some of the watching townspeople shifted, reconsidering. They were preparing to leave when Ward caught up to them with news that showed in the tension of his shoulders. Garrett's filed a complaint. Says Miss Winona stole $300 worth of trade goods. Got a warrant signed by Judge Bartholomew Pierce. Pierce is corrupt, Edgar Holloway interjected, his voice gravelly with age and anger. Everyone knows it. He signs whatever Garrett pays him to sign. Knowing it and proving it are different things, Ward countered. The warrant is technically legal, which means I'm obligated to execute it unless we can show cause. So I am arrested. Winona had gone very still. Not yet. The warrant gives me discretion on timing. I can claim I need to verify the complaint first, but that buys us maybe 3 days. After that, either I arrest you or Garrett comes himself with men who won't care about legal niceties. Then we prepare, Caleb said. 3 days to build a defense. Reverend Whitmore cleared his throat. There's another issue. Town meeting tonight. Douglas MacLeod called it. He's stirring people up, saying harboring an Apache criminal makes us all complicit. Talking about frontier justice if the law won't act. Caleb's jaw tightened. How many are with him? Maybe 20 families, but they're loud and they're angry. Whitmore looked apologetic. I spoke against them. Said Christian charity demands we hear all sides, got shouted down mostly, but some listened. Edgar Holloway tapped his cane against the ground. I listened. So did Ruth Patterson, and the Johnsons, and the Chen family. We're not many, but we're not nothing. One of the ranchers, a man named Thomas Burke, spoke up. I don't know your Apache woman Morrison, but I know you. You're a straight shooter. You say she's innocent. I'm inclined to believe you until shown otherwise. It was small, it was not enough, but it was something. Ward stood. Here's what we do. I'll delay executing the warrant. Say I'm investigating the complaint's validity. Meanwhile, Miss Winona, I need you to tell your story. Everything. Where you were taken. What was done to you. Names if you know them. Details that can be verified. Why? Winona asked. Because if we're going to fight this legally, we need evidence. Your testimony is evidence. If we can show Garrett's complaint is fraudulent, show he was trafficking you illegally, the warrant becomes void. And if we cannot show this, Ward's silence was answer enough. Caleb spoke quietly. Then we fight another way if we must. I can't sanction that, Ward said carefully, but off duty. Well, a man's entitled to defend his property against unlawful seizure. The meaning was clear. If law failed, they were on their own. But they would not be entirely alone. The meeting broke up with plans made. Ward would return to Las Vegas, make a show of investigating. Edgar Holloway and the others would quietly talk to fence-sitters, try to shift opinion. Reverend Whitmore would preach a sermon on Sunday about judging righteously rather than hastily. Small actions, small hopes, but sometimes small was all you had. After they left, Caleb found Winona standing at a window, looking out toward the mountains. Her back was straight, but her shoulders carried tension he had not seen before. You're afraid, he said quietly. Yes. No denial, no false bravery. I survived much, but always by running, hiding, being small and invisible. Now I must stand, be seen, trust white man's law. This is harder than running. You don't have to do this. Dakota said there are Apache groups in New Mexico, small communities. You could disappear. Be safe. She turned to look at him. You want me to go? I want you to be safe. These are different things. Her hand found his, fingers lacing through fingers. I not run anymore, Caleb. I run 3 years, run from soldiers, from slavers, from white man's world that want to erase me. I am tired of running, here, with you. I stop. I stand. Whatever comes, I face it. The determination in her voice was absolute. And looking at her, Caleb realized something that should have terrified him, but instead felt inevitable. He loved her. Not the safe, comfortable love he had had with Eleanor. Something fiercer, born of shared danger and mutual understanding and the recognition that they were both broken people trying to become whole. "Then we stand together," he said. Her smile was small but genuine. "Yes, together." That evening before the town meeting, Caleb found a moment alone. He sat in the back room of Ward's office. His hand reached into his pocket, drew out the letter, the envelope yellowed with age, corners worn soft. "For my Caleb, when you are ready." Eleanor's handwriting, familiar as his own breath. 3 years he had carried it. 3 years he had not had the courage to open. Opening it meant admitting she was truly gone, meant facing whatever she wanted to say to him before she died. Footsteps, light. Winona appeared in the doorway. "Letter from your wife." He nodded, not trusting his voice. "You have not read." Not a question. She saw everything. "I cannot." Cannot or will not? The question was gentle but sharp. He had no answer. Winona came closer, placed her hand on his arm. "The dead want us to live, Caleb. They do not want us to carry them like stones tied around our necks. Whatever she wrote, that is gift, not curse." He looked down at the letter, then at her. "After the meeting. I'll read it after the meeting. Promise." Promise. The town meeting was held in the church, the only building large enough to hold the crowd that gathered. People packed the pews, lined the walls, filled the doorway. The air was thick with body heat and tension. Douglas MacLeod stood at the front with Silas Garrett beside him. MacLeod's face carried the carved lines of perpetual grief, while Garrett wore the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through money or intimidation or both. Caleb entered with Winona at his side. The crowd noise dimmed, then rose again with muttered comments, some hostile, some curious, a few voices calling for quiet, for fair hearing. They took seats near the front. Dakota stood against the back wall, arms crossed, his presence a silent reminder that Winona was not alone or unprotected. MacLeod called the meeting to order with the authority of someone who owned land and therefore believed he owned truth. "We're here to address a criminal matter. An Apache woman is being harbored by Caleb Morrison despite a legal warrant for her arrest. This endangers our community, invites retaliation, makes us all complicit in lawlessness." Garrett stood, his smile oily and practiced. "Gentlemen, ladies, I'm a businessman, a trader operating under legitimate contracts. This woman stole from me, $300 in goods. I merely want what's legally mine returned and the thief brought to justice. If she's innocent, like she claims, the court will free her." "Liar!" Winona's voice cut through the room like a blade. Silence crashed down. Garrett's smile froze. MacLeod's face reddened. "You'll have your turn to speak," MacLeod said stiffly. "No, I speak now." Winona stood, and though she was smaller than most people in the room, something in her bearing made her seem larger. "You call me thief. You lie. You say I steal from him. You lie. You say he is legitimate trader. You lie." She walked to the front, every eye following. "My name is Winona. I am Chiricahua Apache, daughter of Gray Wolf who was warrior, daughter of Morning Dove who was healer. 3 winters ago soldiers attack our village, kill many. My family dies. I am taken by men who sell Apache like cattle." The room had gone absolutely still. This was not what they expected, not the defiance, not the perfect English, not this story. "This man," she pointed at Garrett, "he buy me from bandits for $100, not $300, $100. He planned to sell me in Juarez for $500, use me like slave until then. I am not goods. I am not property. I am human." Garrett started to interrupt. "Let her finish," Ward said from the side of the room. "You'll get your turn." Winona continued, her English clear despite the emotion threading through it. "The wagon is attacked by real bandits, not Apache. White men wearing Apache clothes to hide their crime. They kill Garrett's men, leave me tied to wheel, leave me to die." She turned to look at Caleb. "This man find me, cut ropes, give water, bring me to safety, ask nothing, expect nothing, Just do right thing, because it is right." She faced the crowd again. "Now slavers want me back. Use law as weapon. Pay corrupt judge to sign paper that makes slavery legal again." Her voice rose. "You permit this? You are Americans. Yes, you fight war to end slavery. Many die for this. Now you permit it return because victim has brown skin and different language." The question hung in the air, accusatory and challenging. Ruth Patterson stood from her pew. "I believe her." Edgar Holloway struggled to his feet. "So do I. Known Morrison for years. He's no liar. And I've heard stories about Garrett. Ugly stories that match what she's saying." Garrett's face had gone red. "This is absurd. The word of a savage against a legitimate businessman." "Then prove it," Marshal Ward said quietly. "Show us the contract. Show us the bill of sale for goods she supposedly stole. Show us anything beyond a warrant signed by a judge we all know takes bribes." "I don't need to prove anything. I have a legal warrant." "A warrant based on false testimony is void," Ward countered, "and I'm beginning to think that's exactly what we have here." McLeod banged his fist on the podium. "This is chaos. We can't just ignore legal documents because we don't like them." Caleb stood. "Mr. McLeod, I know you lost your son. I'm truly sorry for that, but punishing Winona won't bring James back. She didn't kill him. The war killed him. The hate killed him. The cycle of violence that grinds up good people on both sides killed him." McLeod's face worked, emotions warring visibly. "My boy was 20 years old, barely grown, cut down by Apache raiders. And her brother was 14 when shot in the back while running from cavalry," Caleb said quietly. "There's enough grief to go around Douglas, more than enough. We can keep adding to it. Or we can try something different. We can choose justice over revenge, truth over easy lies." The silence stretched. People shifted in seats, glanced at neighbors, measured their own hearts against the question Caleb had posed. Finally, Thomas Burke stood. "I move we table any action on this warrant until a proper investigation can be conducted. Let Marshal Ward do his job. Let evidence be gathered. Then we decide." "Seconded," Ruth Patterson said immediately. The vote was not unanimous. Nearly a third of the room voted against the motion, but 2/3 voted for delay, for investigation, for the possibility that truth might matter more than fear. Garrett's face went cold with rage. "This isn't over. I have rights. I have the law." "Then exercise them legally," Ward said, "through proper channels, with real evidence, not through intimidation and mob action." Garrett stalked out, his men following. McLeod remained, looking suddenly older. The fire of his anger banked to coals of exhausted grief. The crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in small groups. Some approached Winona with cautious respect. Others avoided her gaze entirely. But the immediate threat had been postponed. Outside under stars that seemed close enough to touch Caleb and Winona stood together while others filtered past toward homes and beds. "You were brave in there," Caleb said. "I was terrified." She leaned against him slightly. But sometimes terror and bravery look the same from outside. Ruth Patterson made sure everyone knew there would be a community gathering next Sunday to welcome Winona formally. Edgar Holloway promised to bring by tools for expanding the ranch, said something about helping build a future instead of mourning the past. Then it happened. Movement in the darkness, a figure separating from shadow, materializing like a ghost. Caleb reached for his gun, but Winona made a sound, small, choked, disbelieving. Dakota. The name came out like prayer, like impossibility made real. The man stepped into the light from the church windows, tall, maybe 6'2" or more, traditional clothing mixed with pieces of white man's gear, rifle at his back, hair long and black bound with red cloth, and across his bare chest ran a scar, long and vicious, the kind of wound that should have killed. Winona ran. She crashed into him, and they held each other with the desperation of people who had believed reunion was impossible. Brother and sister, both alive against odds that should have destroyed them. Dakota looked over Winona's head at Caleb, His eyes were hard, measuring, perhaps recognizing Caleb the same way Winona had recognized him, the soldier from the canyon, the one who let them live. Slowly, Dakota raised one hand. Not a wave, not quite a threat, something in between, acknowledgement or warning. Caleb raised his hand in return. Whatever happened next, the board had changed. New pieces in play, new complications in a situation already complicated beyond any reasonable expectation. But looking at Winona's face, seeing joy replace the careful control she had maintained, Caleb thought maybe complications were not always bad. Maybe sometimes they were miracles wearing disguise. The reunion lasted deep into the night. Brother and sister sat by the fire speaking rapid Apache, their voices rising and falling in rhythms that carried emotion Caleb could not translate but somehow understood. Loss, survival, the weight of being the last remnants of something larger that had been destroyed. Caleb kept his distance, giving them space for grief and joy to exist in whatever proportions they needed. When the sky began to lighten toward dawn, Dakota stood. He walked toward Caleb with the measured pace of someone accustomed to being watched, to needing to prove he meant no immediate harm. Caleb stood his ground, hands visible, rifle leaning against the fence behind him. Dakota stopped 10 feet away. His eyes were the same dark brown as his sister's, but where hers held fire barely contained his held something colder. Calculation, the patience of a hunter. "You are the soldier," Dakota said, his English rougher than Winona's, accented heavily, but clear enough. "From Canyon. 3 winters past." "Yes." "No point in denial. You let my mother and sister run. Why?" The question hung between them, sharp as any blade. "Because it was wrong," Caleb said quietly. "The orders were wrong. What we were doing was wrong. Should have been more of us who turned away. Should have been all of us. Many soldiers there. You only one who turn away. I'm not proud of that." Dakota studied him for a long moment. "You saved my sister yesterday. This thing I see from Ridge. Watch you cut ropes, give water, bring her here safe." He paused. "This clears old debt. We are even now." "I wasn't keeping score." "Apache always keeps score. Is how we survive. Know who owes what, who can be trusted, who cannot." His expression did not change, but something in his posture eased fractionally. "You I trust, for now." It was hardly a ringing endorsement, but Caleb would take it. "How did you survive?" Caleb asked. "We were told there were no survivors except women and children who escaped." Dakota's hand moved unconsciously to the scar. "Saber cut me open. I fall. They think I dead. When they leave Navajo, hunters find me. Half dead. Mostly dead. They take me to their people. Medicine woman heal me. Many months. When I wake I have only one thought. Find my sister." "How did you know she was alive?" "Did not know. Only hoped." Dakota glanced back at Winona. "I searched 6 moons. Ask at reservations. Track rumors. Find nothing until 2 weeks ago. Hear story of Apache woman taken by slavers. Description match Winona. I follow." "You've been watching us," Caleb said, understanding now. The feeling of being observed, the sense of eyes in darkness. "Yes. Make sure you not harm her. Make sure she not prisoner again, just different cage." "She's not a prisoner. She's free to go whenever she wants." Dakota's eyes returned to Caleb's face. "She not want to go. This is problem." "Why is that a problem?" "Because white man's world does not let Apache woman choose white man, and white man's world is the one with guns and laws and power." Dakota moved closer, voice dropping. "Men who take her will come back. More men. You know this." "I know." "You ready to die for my sister?" The question was blunt, practical. Caleb considered it seriously. Was he ready to die? He had been ready to die since Eleanor and Lily went into the ground. Living had been the harder choice, the one that required more courage. Dying would almost be a relief, but dying for something, for someone, for a principle that mattered, that was different, that gave death meaning it had lacked before. "Yes," he said simply. Dakota nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied some requirement. "Then we fight together, you, me, my sister. Maybe we die, maybe we win, but we not run." "Agreed." Winona called something in Apache. Dakota responded, then switched to English for Caleb's benefit. "She say I should trust you. She say spirits show her you are part of her path now. I do not argue with spirits or sisters. Both are dangerous when angry." Despite the gravity of their situation, Caleb found himself almost smiling. Wise policy. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of preparation and tension and small victories. Caleb spent the days fortifying defenses with the methodical care of a soldier who understood that survival often depended on details overlooked. Extra ammunition stored in the barn, water barrels filled and positioned, sight lines cleared, escape routes planned and practiced. Dakota worked alongside him, the two men communicating more through gesture and shared understanding than words. The Apache had fought cavalry for years before the final defeat. He knew tactics, knew how white men fought, knew their patterns and assumptions. In the evenings by lamplight, Caleb would point to words in the newspaper or his few books. Winona would sound them out slowly at first. Then, with growing confidence, her intelligence was sharp, her memory remarkable. What might have taken months for some took her mere days. "Justice," she read haltingly from the newspaper, her finger underlining the word. "What does this mean in practice? I know the word. But does white man's world have the thing itself? Sometimes, not always, not often enough, but sometimes. Then we fight for sometimes, better than never." One night after Winona had gone to sleep and Dakota was keeping watch outside, Caleb finally opened the letter. Eleanor's handwriting. Familiar, dear, now painful. "My dearest Caleb, if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not mourn too long. That is an order, soldier. I know you. I know you will blame yourself. Do not. The fever was nobody's fault. Your absence did not kill us. The sickness did. You would have been helpless even if you were here. What I want to say is this: live. Not just survive. Live. Find joy again. Find purpose. Find love if it comes. I give you permission. I want this for you. Lily would want you to be happy. I want you to be happy. Be happy, Caleb. This is the last gift I can give you. Permission to go on. Forever your loving wife, Eleanor." Caleb sat alone with the letter in his hands, tears running down his cheeks that he did not bother to wipe. 3 years carrying this weight. And now, permission. Not betrayal to move forward, but honoring her wish. He folded the letter carefully, placed it near the photograph of Eleanor and Lily. Then he went outside to stand under the stars, breathing the cold desert air, and for the first time in 3 years feeling something other than the weight of guilt. The next morning Douglas MacLeod appeared at the ranch, alone, no gun drawn, no threats, just an old man who looked exhausted to his bones, as if hatred had drained everything else from him. Caleb met him in the yard, hand near his weapon but not grasping it. "Mr. MacLeod?" "Mr. Morrison, I ask for a minute of your time." They sat on the porch, 2 men with complicated pasts and uncertain presents. MacLeod stared at his hands for a long moment, then spoke. "My son, James. He died in the raid. True enough, but not the way I told people." Caleb waited. "He went raiding for horses, not to defend anything, just to steal, because I taught him that Apache people didn't deserve respect, because I fed him my own bitterness about losing land, losing the life I imagined." His voice shook. "He died 20 years old, not yet grown, cut down for doing what I taught him was right." MacLeod looked up, eyes wet. "I blamed the Apache for his death. Easier than blaming myself for raising him wrong, for teaching him hate instead of sense. Winona appeared at the door. She had heard. "I'm sorry," McLeod said to her, "for what I helped do at the meeting, for what I said, for what I wanted to happen to you, for letting grief turn me into something ugly." The apology hung in the air, imperfect but genuine. Winona studied him, then nodded once. "I am sorry for your son, sorry for all the sons, all the daughters, all the mothers and fathers. Too much grief everywhere, too much hate." She paused. "But we can choose different now, choose to build instead of destroy." "Yes," McLeod said quietly. "Yes, I think maybe we can." He put his hat back on, nodded to Caleb. "You're a better man than me, Morrison. I hope you know that." He walked back to his horse, mounted, rode away alone into the morning. That afternoon Marshal Ward arrived with news that showed in the tension of his shoulders. "Garrett's in Santa Fe, coming back with 10 men, guns, horses, intent. He'll be here tonight or tomorrow morning. The warrant, still being investigated. Federal marshals are on their way from Albuquerque, but they won't arrive for at least 3 days. We don't have 3 days. No, we don't." Caleb looked at Winona, at Dakota, at the people who had become unexpected allies. "Then we prepare, and we stand." Winona caught his eye. Her hand moved to her stomach, an unconscious gesture, but Caleb noticed. There was something in her expression, something she had not yet said. Later that evening, alone together while Dakota checked the perimeter, Caleb asked her directly, "There's something you haven't told me." Winona was quiet for a long moment. Then she took his hand, placed it against her belly. "I carry your child," she said softly. "2 moons now. I was not certain until this week." Caleb's breath caught. A child. In the middle of all this danger and uncertainty and approaching violence. New life. "We have more to fight for than just ourselves," she said. "Yes," Caleb replied, his voice unsteady. "Yes, we do." He pulled her close, held her against him, feeling the warmth of her, the reality of her. And somewhere beneath his palm, the tiny promise of a future he had thought was impossible. Tomorrow would bring violence. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning. But tonight, in this moment, Caleb Morrison understood what he was fighting for. Not revenge, not redemption. Life itself. And that was worth everything. The storm was coming. They could feel it in the air, could see it in the way the horses shifted nervously in the corral, could hear it in the wind that had begun to carry whispers of things to come. But they were ready as anyone could be for what was about to happen. The last day before Silas Garrett arrived felt like it stretched forever and ended too soon. Caleb worked from dawn until dusk, checking positions, stockpiling ammunition, making sure every detail was attended to. The soldier in him understood that survival often came down to preparation, to the small things that separated the living from the dead. Dakota had scouted the approach routes, marked potential ambush points, found terrain advantages that enemies might overlook. His experience fighting cavalry, fighting settlers, fighting the land itself complemented Caleb's formal military training in ways neither could have achieved alone. They spoke little, but understanding passed between them, 2 warriors preparing for what might be their last battle. As darkness fell, Caleb found Winona standing at the window. She was watching the stars appear one by one in the deepening sky. Her hand rested on her belly where their child grew, that small life they had created against all odds. "You are afraid?" she asked without turning. "Yes, but fear is not a reason to run." She turned to face him. "I think about the baby, about what world it will be born into, whether it will be Apache or white or both or neither." Caleb moved closer, placed his hand on her shoulder. "It will be itself. We will teach it both languages, both ways. Let it choose what fits, what matters. Love it regardless." "This is good answer." "You always say I have good answers." "Because you do." She took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I do not regret choosing you, trusting you, building this with you. No regrets." "Me neither," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it completely. They stood together in the lamplight, two people who had found each other through violence and loss and somehow built something worth protecting. Outside, the wind moved through the high desert, carrying sounds that might have been coyotes, might have been ghosts, might have been tomorrow calling their names. They came at dusk the following day, 20 men on horseback, torches lit, guns ready. Garrett rode at the front with Colt Reeves beside him. The others were townsmen and hired guns, men who had drunk themselves into courage at the saloon. Caleb stood on the porch, rifle held easy but ready. Winona was inside the house, positioned where she could cover the front approach. Dakota waited in the barn loft. Wide view, rifle sighted, 3 against 20. The math was not in their favor. Garrett reined up 30 yards from the house, close enough to talk, far enough to charge if they chose. Morrison, send out the Apache woman. Last chance to do this peaceful. She's not going anywhere, Silas. We've been through this. Town council voted to delay, not refuse, but I have proof now. Real papers from Santa Fe, bill of sale, inventory, everything legal. Forged papers from a corrupt judge are not proof. Garrett's face hardened. The law is on my side, Morrison. She's my property. She's a human being. That's the only rule that matters. Colt Reeves laughed, the sound ugly in the evening air. You really going to die for some Apache? Winona appeared in the doorway. Her voice rang out clear and strong. You want me, Garrett? Then come get me, but know that some of you will not ride home. Several men in the group shifted uneasily. The threat from a woman was not what they expected. Thomas Burke spoke from the back of the group. Garrett, this sounds a lot like you're admitting intent to enslave. That's a federal crime. Shut up, Burke. You're either with us or against us. I'm with the law, real law, not mob law dressed up in legal papers. Burke turned his horse. I'm out. Anyone else with sense? Come on. 3 other men followed Burke. The group shrank from 20 to 16. Still overwhelming odds. But the defection had shaken confidence. Garrett's expression went cold with barely controlled rage. Last chance, Morrison. Send her out or we come in. Then come in, but know that some of you won't be riding home. For a long moment, nothing moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Garrett raised his hand. A signal. 2 men spurred their horses forward. Dakota's rifle cracked from the barn loft. The first man's horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider into the dust. The second man pulled up short, eyes wide with sudden fear. Next one goes through flesh, not horse, Dakota called out. Then Garrett's face twisted with rage. Rush them all at once. But before anyone could move, hoofbeats sounded from the direction of town. Caleb's heart sank. Reinforcements for Garrett would end this quickly and badly. But the riders that emerged from the gloom wore badges. Marshal Benjamin Ward led the group with 2 deputies, and behind them came Douglas McLeod, Reverend Whitmore, Edgar Holloway, Ruth Patterson, and a dozen others from town, not armed for violence, but present. Witnesses. Ward rode straight into the middle of the standoff, his authority absolute. This ends now. He held up papers. I have sworn statements from 3 witnesses in Santa Fe. Garrett's documents are forgeries. The judge who signed the warrant is under federal investigation for corruption. And I have testimony from 2 former associates of Garrett willing to testify he's been trafficking people for 5 years. Garrett's face went white, then red. You can't prove any of that. Federal marshals are on their way from Albuquerque. They'll prove it just fine. Ward's hand rested on his gun. You're under arrest, Silas Garrett. Human trafficking, fraud, attempted kidnapping. You can come quiet or come hard, your choice. For a moment Caleb thought Garrett would draw, thought violence would come despite everything. But Garrett was a bully and a criminal, not a warrior. He folded when faced with real consequences. This isn't over, Garrett spat as Ward's deputy bound his hands. I have friends, connections. In prison, maybe, Ward said. Those are the only friends you'll be seeing for a long time. The crowd dispersed slowly. The men who had come for violence slunk away into the darkness, shame or relief showing in their postures. Douglas MacLeod remained after the others had gone. He caught Caleb's eye, nodded once, a silent acknowledgment of the conversation they had shared days before, then mounted his horse and rode away into the darkness. 1 week later, Elder Greyfeather arrived at dawn. He was ancient, his face a landscape of wrinkles that mapped decades of survival in unforgiving country. He moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had outlived its strength, but whose spirit refused to acknowledge limitation. Dakota had brought him from the Navajo settlement where he had healed after the massacre. Greyfeather was not Winona's blood grandfather. But the title carried weight beyond genetics. It spoke to connection, to responsibility across generations. The ceremony was simple but profound. Smoke from sage burned in a small clay bowl. Words chanted in rhythms older than the nation that now claimed this land. Greyfeather marked Winona's forehead with ash, then turned to Caleb. Caleb knelt without being asked, somehow knowing it was required. The ash touched his forehead, cool and gritty. Greyfeather's voice rose and fell in patterns that felt like benediction, like the earth itself speaking through vocal cords worn thin by time. When it ended, Greyfeather clasped Caleb's shoulder once, firmly. Dakota translated. He says you are married now in the eyes of spirits and ancestors. White man's law does not matter. Apache law is older, stronger. Winona looked at Caleb across the dying fire, her face showing something complex and layered, not simple forgiveness, but something deeper. You are my husband. I am your wife. This is done. Caleb should have felt trapped, manipulated, rushed into something he had not chosen. But standing there with ash on his forehead and the smell of sage in his lungs, he felt only a strange calm, as if something that had been misaligned had quietly shifted into proper position. "All right," he said. "All right." She seemed surprised by his easy acceptance. "You told me this would happen. The first night. I had time to think about it, to decide if I wanted to fight it." He turned to face her fully. "I don't want to fight it, Winona. I don't understand it, can't explain it, but I don't want to fight it." Her smile transformed her face, brought light to features that had carried too much shadow. She took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "Good, because I am very stubborn. Would be difficult marriage if you fight." Despite everything, despite the danger that had circled them like wolves around campfire light, Caleb laughed. 2 weeks later, the federal trial took place in Santa Fe. A large courtroom with high ceilings and stern faces. Winona testified, her voice steady as she recounted her story in clear English that surprised some in the room. Lawyer Jonathan Blake, who had taken the case for ideals more than profit, presented arguments about treaty rights, about human dignity, about the difference between law and justice. Silas Garrett was convicted on multiple counts: human trafficking, fraud, attempted kidnapping. The sentence was severe, 20 years in federal prison, possibly more if additional charges were proven. Judge Pierce was removed from the bench, charged with taking bribes, the network of corruption exposed, not completely, but enough to cause damage, to create space for something better to grow. As they left the courthouse, Winona paused on the steps. "Is this justice?" she asked. "Part of it," Caleb said. "Maybe not everything, but part. Then we take the part. Build on it." He nodded. "Yes, we build." 6 months passed. 6 months like water flowing over stone, slow and steady, reshaping everything it touched. Winter came to New Mexico territory with cold that bit through clothing and nights that stretched long and dark. But inside the ranch house, warmth grew in ways that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. Caleb woke on a May morning to find Winona already awake. She sat by the window, watching dawn paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, her belly now unmistakably swollen with pregnancy, their child growing inside her, proof of something he had thought impossible. "You wake quiet today," she observed. "Usually you sound like bear leaving cave." He laughed. the sound coming easier now than it had in years. "I was trying not to disturb you." "I am already disturbed. Baby kicks like angry mule." He rose, crossed to her, placed his hand gently on the curve. As if in response, a flutter of movement answered. The first time he had felt it, he had nearly wept. Even now, months later, it struck him as miraculous. "Strong," he said. "Like mother, like father, like all the stubborn people this child comes from." She covered his hand with hers. "I think about this baby growing up here. What kind of world we make for them. Will they be Apache? White? Both? Neither?" It was a question they had circled many times without finding complete answers. The baby would exist between worlds, claimed fully by neither, forced to carve space in the narrow ground between. "They'll be themselves," Caleb said. "We'll teach them both languages, both ways. Let them choose what fits, what matters. Love them regardless." "This is good answer." She stood, moved to the kitchen to start breakfast. Dakota comes today with news from Two Moons Settlement. 2 moons. That was new too. Still growing, still finding its shape. 15 Apache families who had refused reservation life, along with a handful of Navajo and a few white families willing to try something different. They had claimed land 20 miles north, established a community that existed in legal gray areas but survived through determined cooperation. Gray Feather lived there now, the elder's presence lending legitimacy and wisdom. Dakota divided his time between there and Caleb's ranch, building bridges, maintaining connections, serving as translator between worlds that still struggled to understand each other. The community had named itself 2 Moons after a symbol Winona had drawn in the dirt that first night. 2 figures beneath 1 moon, the idea that different peoples could shelter under the same sky, share the same earth, build the same future. It was idealistic, probably impossible, but it was trying to exist anyway, and that mattered. Labor began on a Tuesday morning in early May. The sun had barely cleared the mountains when Winona's water broke, the sudden gush sending her stumbling back toward the house. "Caleb, baby comes now." He rode for Dr. Margaret Lynn while Dakota stayed with Winona, his presence calm and steadying. By the time Caleb returned with the doctor, contractions were coming hard and fast, Winona's face tight with pain, but she refused to cry out. Ruth Patterson had arrived with Dr. Lynn, having heard the news spreading through town. She brought supplies and experience from delivering her own 4 children. She and Dr. Lynn worked together, an unlikely team that functioned with practiced efficiency. Caleb felt useless standing aside while women's work proceeded, but Winona reached for his hand during contractions, gripping hard enough to leave marks, and he understood his role. Anchor, witness, silent support for something his body could never fully comprehend. The labor lasted 6 hours, not long by some standards, but each minute felt stretched, distorted by the intensity of Winona's effort and the knowledge that this moment would split time into before and after. When the baby finally emerged, slick and red and screaming with absolute outrage at being expelled from warmth into air, Caleb felt something in his chest crack open. Dr. Lynn handled the child with practiced care, clearing airways, checking responses, while Ruth cut and tied the cord with steady hands. "A girl," Dr. Lynn announced, placing the cleaned and wrapped infant into Winona's arms. "Perfect, healthy, loud." Winona looked down at the tiny face, features that were somehow both her and Caleb and entirely their own creation. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling, laughing, crying, all at once. "She is beautiful. She is perfect." Caleb moved closer, looked at his daughter. This new life they had made against odds that had seemed insurmountable. The baby had Winona's dark hair, his lighter skin tone, features that would probably shift and settle over years into something uniquely hers. "What do we call her?" he asked. Winona had been thinking about this for months, testing names in both languages, looking for something that honored both heritages without privileging one over the other. "Hope," she said softly, in English, because this is the language she will need in this world. She paused. And morning star in the Apache way, because she was born with the sunrise, because she is light after long darkness. Hope Morning Star Morrison, Caleb said, testing the weight of it. 3 names, 3 identities, 3 worlds compressed into one small person who would have to navigate them all. Yes, Winona said. This is her name. This is who she is. Bridge between worlds. Hope that different things can exist together. The baby yawned, a movement so tiny and perfect it made all 3 adults smile. 1 week after the birth, Gray Feather returned. He performed a blessing in Apache, placed a small medicine bag around Hope Morningstar's neck, then spoke through Dakota's translation. He says this child is special, born from 2 worlds, belonging to both and neither. She will forge new path, not Apache, not white, but something that does not yet have a name. The elder continued, his voice dropping. He says the Spirit showed him a vision. This child will stand between 2 peoples, not as warrior, but as bridge. She will speak language both sides understand. She will heal wounds we cannot heal. He looked at Caleb and Winona. Raise her well. Teach her both ways. Let her choose her own path. Caleb looked down at his daughter. This tiny person who would face her own battles, but would do so knowing she came from people who refused to give up, who bloomed in the hardest soil, who transformed their scars into seeds for the future. We will, he said simply. That night, after the visitors had gone, Caleb stood by the window, looking out at stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear desert sky. Hope. Morning Star slept in the cradle Edgar Holloway had built, a gift from the old man whose wife had been Navajo, who understood something about building families across boundaries the world said could not be crossed. Winona came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About Eleanor and Lily, about what they would say about all this?" "What would they say?" He smiled, the first time he had mentioned them without feeling the cut of a knife. "Eleanor would say, 'I need a haircut.' Lily would ask you 100 questions about Apache life, would drive you crazy with curiosity." Winona laughed softly. "I would have liked her. She would have liked you. Both of them would." They stood together in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the soft breathing of their daughter. "Tell me," Caleb said gently, "what does your name really mean? I know the translation, but what does it truly mean?" Winona considered the question. "My mother said Winona means firstborn daughter, but also means something that cannot be killed even when cut down, something that blooms again no matter how hard the winter, how deep the snow, how long the drought." She looked at Hope Morning Star. She said some things are eternal, not because they never die, but because they always come back. Life finds way, beauty finds way, hope finds way. "And has it?" Caleb asked. "Found its way?" Winona's eyes met his, holding certainty that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than individual experience. "Yes," she said simply. "We are the way. This baby is the way. 2 Moons settlement is the way. Every person who chooses kindness over hate, justice over revenge, hope over despair, these are how the eternal blossom keeps blooming." She shifted Hope in her arms. "What do you think? Will she have an easy life, or will she spend it fighting the same battles we fought?" "Both," Caleb said. "Always both. The world does not change fast enough to spare children. But maybe it changes enough that her fight is different. Maybe she fights from stronger position, with law degree like Jonathan Blake, or with doctor knowledge like Margaret Lynn, or with something we cannot imagine yet." "She will be extraordinary," Dakota said from the doorway. He had been listening. "Already is. Child of 2 worlds who belongs to both and neither. She will forge new path. This is what warriors do. Our ancestors fought with weapons. We fight with survival, with persistence. She will fight with knowledge and presence. Each generation different weapon. same war. The assessment was bleak, but somehow hopeful. The war for existence, for dignity, for the right to take up space in the world. It continued. But the weapons evolved, the tactics shifted, and sometimes just surviving long enough to have children was its own form of victory. As darkness fell and stars emerged in their familiar patterns, Winona began to hum, a lullaby from her childhood, the one her mother had sung, the one her mother's mother had sung before that. The melody was old, older than memory, carrying the weight of generations who had faced impossible odds and survived anyway. Caleb listened, committing the sound to memory. This was what they were building. Not just a household or a marriage or a family, but a continuation, a refusal to be erased, a determination that their child would know where she came from, would carry forward the stories and songs and stubborn persistence that had kept her people alive through centuries of attempted destruction. Hope Morning Star stirred in her sleep, made small sounds that might have been dreams or might have been responses to the music wrapping around her. Winona's voice rose and fell, painting pictures and sound of canyons and rivers, of eagles and deer, of spirits that watched over the people even when the people seemed lost. When the song ended, silence settled soft and comfortable. Outside, rain began to fall. It came gentle at first, then harder, drumming on the roof with the rhythm of blessing. It would fill the water barrels, green the pastures, make the hard land briefly soft and welcoming. Caleb stood at the window watching water streak the glass, Hope Morning Star asleep against his shoulder. Behind him, Winona moved through the house, lighting lamps, making coffee, humming that ancient lullaby. The ordinary work of living made sacred by attention, by gratitude, by the understanding that this right here was what they had fought for. Not perfection, not even safety, just the chance to build a life, to raise a child, to create small spaces of peace in a world that often preferred war. The rain continued through the night, washing the world clean, and in the morning when they woke to find the desert transformed, blooming in impossible colors, Caleb understood what Winona's name truly meant. The eternal blossom was not a flower that never died. It was the determination to bloom again and again and again, no matter what tried to stop it. It was Winona surviving slavery and trauma and loss to stand here, whole and strong. It was Caleb surviving war and grief and guilt to become someone capable of love again. It was their daughter, Hope Morning Star, who would face her own battles but would do so knowing she came from people who refused to give up, who bloomed in the hardest soil, who transformed their scars into seeds for the future. The eternal blossom was hope itself, and it had taken root here in the hard ground of New Mexico territory, in the small ranch house where two people from different worlds had chosen each other and built something new from their combined histories. The desert spread before them in the morning light, flowers blooming in colors that had been waiting beneath the surface, waiting for the rain, waiting for the right conditions, waiting to show what was possible when life refused to give up. Caleb held his daughter, watched his wife, felt the presence of the brother who had become family, thought of the community growing at 2 Moons, of the allies in Las Vegas settlement, of all the people who had chosen to build instead of destroy. This was the victory, not over enemies, over despair, over the belief that the past determined the future, over the lie that broken things could not be made whole. The eternal blossom would bloom. It would always bloom, no matter how long the winter, no matter how hard the ground, no matter how dark the night. Because somewhere, always someone would choose hope, and that choice would become a seed, and that seed would become a flower, and that flower would become proof that love was stronger than hate, that justice was possible even when the world said otherwise, that two people from different worlds could build a bridge between them, and on that bridge a child could stand, looking toward a future that did not yet exist, but would, because hope made it so, because the eternal blossom made it so, because Winona and Caleb and Hope Morning Star made it so, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one bloom at a time, forever.